Hi, Kaizeners, and welcome again to the KAIZEN Podcast. Today, back already in the studio. However, as you can see, I'm talking English once again and not back to the Polish language. And that's because today I have a guest with me that speaks English as well from the UK. And today is a bit interesting, the episode that we have, because until now, all the episodes that we've been doing were mainly towards manufacturing. We're also talking about some of them in terms of logistics. And we had many guests that were referring to the Toyota production system as the Kaizen methodology, or also some business excellence systems related to manufacturing mainly. But today, I would like to go to another sector completely. Lately, if you remember with Bruno, we were discussing about luxury and products of that are not, let's say, manufactured in the same way as we can understand on mass production or other types of sectors. And today I'm going to go a bit more deeper with my guests to the retail sector. So all what is related to stores or to any type of business that is in the services sector. Today I have with me a very special guest, Robert Southern, Head of Digital Capabilities Transformation at Philip Morris International, PMI. Hi, Robert, and welcome.
Hi, Alish. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you also for being here.
Pleasure.
I know it's been a long trip coming from the UK, but we've been talking to set up the dates recently, so to take advantage and be here in the studio together. So, Robert, always when I start my podcast, I'm trying to get my audience closer to my guest. And I will do it the same way this time. So my first question, as always, who is Robert Southern?
Yeah, well, thank you. And I guess, from your introduction, hopefully fitting quite well. So I would describe myself as a retailer. I've spent much of my career in retail, particularly retail operations, sort of the engine room, let's say, of how a retailer works. My wife is a retailer, and I hope potentially in the future my daughter becomes a retailer as well. So we're a retail family. I've always worked from a retail perspective in sort of three different areas from a retail perspective. So either in stores or customer service and call centres, and finally then logistics and supply chain. And for me, that's basically it's a people focused role, because from a retail perspective, outside of the head office, that's where your people are based. They're either in a store, they're in a call centre, or they're in a logistics warehouse. So my role from a retail operations perspective has always been focused around people. And hopefully I come across as a bit of a nice guy. So interacting with people is sort of part of the job and something I very much enjoy. But also looking at how people deal with other people, and I guess in this case, consumers, and getting colleagues engaged with how to best deal and how best to serve consumers, because ultimately consumers buying more product is what makes a retailer go forward. So I guess, retail operations is what I'd describe myself as. I've spent a number of years looking in different disciplines around that space. So all the way from strategy. So I was a strategy consultant for a number of years, helping retailers build what their strategy should look like, all the way through to process optimization in a warehouse, in a call center, and in a store, and kind of everything else in between. So that's really my kind of background and understanding is really focused on retail operations and how business process interacts with people, interacts with consumers, and then ultimately probably underneath some of it all, and where my current role is very focused around technology and how that supports optimizing and improving both the experience for consumers as well as colleagues as well.
So you've been actually around the full chain, let's call it, from the store where our consumer is based to the logistics supply chain on how do we deliver that to the stores, also through the customer service you just mentioned, technologies that we bring to the stores in that case, I understand, but not only. So I guess you have a perspective, or a broad perspective through all the chain. But now I would like to understand how you got there. What was the background behind being a retailer? So how everything started. And also, I would like to understand, because I know you've been in touch with the lean methodology, Kaizen methodology, kind of it, how you got to know that methodology and how you kind of implemented it in the past, or what were the beginnings with Kaizen and lean in your story?
Sure. Yeah. So So from a sort of education perspective, I came out of university with a degree in computing and information systems. So that's kind of where the technology element kind of comes in. But I think always from there, I went to try and get into the internet retailing industry straight then from university. I graduated with a specialism in web design. And web design was something I was very interested in.
So you were linked to technology from the beginning, right?
I was linked to technology from the beginning, yeah. It's always been sort of, I like to, let's say from a business perspective. I'm not a coder, never have been. Don't wish to do so in the future. So I kind of specialised in web design, but also then system architecture. So how data moved across different systems and how systems were architected, to get the right outcomes, basically. So from there, wanted to go into the retail industry, didn't make it as I came out of university and ended up in the brewery industry. It was local to where I was in Northampton. The Carlsberg Brewery in the UK is based in Northampton. And so from there kind of went into production planning. So data focused in terms of numbers and, how much beer should we produce and where does it need to be and all that type of good stuff, and spent a bit of time in my early career in that space. Then moved into another brewery retailer, InBev, or AB InBev as it is now. Again, similar discipline, and then finally found myself up with Belkin Electronics. So electronics manufacture, also in production planning and all that type of good stuff. And that's, I think for me, the stepping stone from there of that background around, let's say, stock optimization, which is a theme that runs through my career in the future. And then I moved into Dixon's store group, as it was back then, Currys PLC, as it is now. So the number one electronics retailer in the UK. So I guess a little bit of technology in there for sure. But it was really about then, it was getting myself then closer back to retail and to the internet and omni-channel. And it was really that birth and the generation of where retailers were bringing together physical stores and e-commerce and starting to blend them together. So
this moment of transformation was happening at the moment, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly. So they were, I think at the time, Dixon Store Group were kind of at the forefront of click and collect and reserve and collect propositions from a customer perspective. So you would go online, you'd find the product or products that you wanted to collect or reserve in store, place the order through the system, pay for the stock, and then go to your local store and go and collect it. So yeah, that was, I joined the I guess as it was called then, e-commerce services team. It wasn't quite joined together. It wasn't quite omni-channel back then. It was still different departments working together, but it was really then the technology that was pulling those departments together, putting the stores business and the e-commerce infrastructure, pulling that together. And I was part of the team there that stretched all the way from order management in terms of taking cash from consumers and credit card payments, all the way through to deliveries, stock management, order fulfillment, the classic from a call center perspective, where is my order, and dealing with that from a call center perspective. And then my role was also then stretching into our logistics and supply chain area, where I was looking after the supply chain contracts with our third parties, and then also working on a transition of that into our own logistics fulfillment centre, based up in Newark, as it was back then. About 1 million square foot of warehousing based up in Newark. And it was there actually that really my journey with Lean and Kaizen started to take shape. So at the time there, a guy called John Browett had come from Tesco.com and had learnt around Lean Six Sigma, Kaizen, this way of working, which Tesco were using very successfully within their grocery business. And he came to Dixon's as CEO, and he'd implemented then a training program and a structure within the business to train existing colleagues in Lean Six Sigma and Kaizen methodologies in a similar method to what Tesco were doing at the same time during their growth period in the early noughties, and basically using external consultancies similar to yourselves within the Kaizen Institute to help train existing colleagues, through the Lean Six Sigma black belt up to black belt process through the different belts, and then allowing those people with that business knowledge and that training to go into the business and start to optimize and introduce lean and Kaizen into the organization for three reasons. One was for making it better for consumers, so a better consumer experience, simpler for colleagues, which was around making processes more simple and easy to execute, so colleague satisfaction going up. And the final one was then cheaper for Dixons. So sort of this sort of tripod, let's say, of objectives and outcomes that training regime and the program that went with it was looking to do, was looking to take those three things and implement them across the business, from head office all the way through into the supply chain, into the customer service centre, and into stores. So I went through the training program. It was a company called the George Group, which Accenture ended up acquiring. There's lots of my sort of work story that started to cross over time, so I ended up at Accenture a little later in my career. And yeah, I was trained up to green belt standard, and took on the toolkit, the sort of Kaizen and lean toolkit that a good practitioner would have. At the time, I thought it was very much something that maybe I wouldn't practically use myself, but it was really good to understand the principles and methodologies of how to optimize processes and the outcomes that you can deliver. But then as I went through my career, I realized actually these tools were actually super useful on a day-to-day basis, and ended up getting more and more into the practical side of actually delivering it. So that was kind of where for me it was born, and it was super exciting to have working with this external consultancy. I hadn't worked with an external consultancy back then. I guess probably being more junior in my career, and as I got more mature, that was a very interesting thing to work with people that were management consultants, which I always thought was quite interesting, quite cool job to have. And from there, I moved on and went to Tesco. So I stayed. It was
quite the link, I guess.
Quite the link. It was an easy link to make. So the team that I was in at Dixons at the time, it was part of that transformation to omnichannel, and it got blended with a much larger team. And my director at the time, he moved on from the business, and he'd been sort of my mentor and been looking after me very closely. And I felt that maybe it was the right time to make a move, and the role at Tesco came up, which seemed to me like a logical progression, because Tesco at the time and still today, the number one retailer in the UK. They are, if you want to work in retail, Tesco is one of the go-to places from that perspective. So for me, it was a nice transition. Obviously, having the background in green belt and lean Lean Six Sigma and Kaizen, for me it was a nice easy transition, because I went to a retailer where that was within the culture. It was knitted in with the culture. So Terry Leahy, who was the famous CEO who took Tesco to being, I think it was from number 4 grocery retailer in the UK to being world number 2. It was his brainchild, and John Browett, the CEO of Dixons. That's where he'd been schooled. And yes, it was a very then interesting transition, and then got me back to technology again. So when I joined Tesco, I was then leading implementation of an order management system for the online business, both grocery and non-food side of the business at the time. So taking some of my logistics background from Dixons that I'd learnt and applying that on the Tesco scale, obviously much larger organisation, many more stores, much more complex, much more sophisticated. And spent a couple of years there, then moved into a more operational role, and then that led me into this wonderful world of management consulting for the next decade.
You fall there at the end of the day.
Exactly. So
on the other side, right?
I went to the other side. I mean, at the time, and again, I went to a company called Javelin Group. Unfortunately, have been dissolved now. Another acquisition by Accenture. We were acquired by Accenture when I was there. But yeah, spent then 10 years in consulting, working for retailers from small startups with sort of 5-10 stores in London, all the way through to massive global organisations like Philip Morris, where I work now, which was one of my clients when I was working there. And I found then through my consulting career that a lot of those principles and methodologies that I'd learned within Kaizen and Lean were just very applicable to my day-to-day role, and were then hugely helpful to me in terms of being able to deliver client value and to be able to assess opportunities optimization opportunities within organizations, and ultimately as a management consultant, that's what you're there to do. You're there to solve a problem. You get posed a question and you did come up with a solution, however that might be. So yeah, for me that was then the ability to take those tools and deploy them in multiple organizations. Sort of, I think during my consulting career, probably worked for about 30 or more retailers in different aspects. Again, always though, we'd come back to those three main areas, as I said at the start, always either within stores, within call centers and customer service, or in e-commerce supply chain. And I guess ultimately my career evolved within that consulting space then, really then at optimizing retailers, particularly where you were joining the omni-channels together. And I became more specialized in the store aspect of retail, with a particular focus for, let's call it omni-channel optimization. So how do you prepare a store to help, again, optimize stock when customers are ordering from any location, in some cases any location in the world? How do you bring together different elements of stock which might be stored in different locations, bring them together into an order and get them through to customers? And that's where retailers really want to be able to leverage the stock that they've got all across their organisation, including stores themselves, and equipping then stores and the teams and the colleagues within stores with that ability to be able to serve customer orders from a, let's say, non-present customer who's ordered online and then wants fulfillment remotely. So yeah, kind of, I guess during that phase of my career, I was then sort of pushed as an expert and a specialist in that area. And I guess my background had served me well, both within Lean and Kaizen, but also operationally, having understood those three areas of a retailer. For me, then it was then very helpful and very easy for me to help optimize and support clients, because I had a good background in logistics and supply chain, good background in call centers, and then a good background in stores, of being able to bring those together then with that sort of lean methodology and thinking, always about not just necessarily implementing changes and improvements for today, but always thinking about tomorrow. So always thinking about tactical quick wins as well as long-term strategic optimization, to be able to bring the best for the customers. And again, coming back to those same principles from Tesco: better for the customers, simpler for colleagues, so making the processes nice and simple for colleagues, and then obviously then cheaper for the organisation. And obviously within an organisations like Tesco and Dixon's, where the margins are super thin, then actually the focus on the last one, the cheaper for the business, super important.
But that's actually something that I had in mind as you were discussing or telling us about these different focuses, because it is easy in manufacturing, and you have this background as well, to have Lean and Kaizen. So this is something that is quite, let's say, nowadays I can say that it's quite well known across the manufacturing sector. Retail is true that it's not a sector that the first thing you fall into when you are discussing about optimizing costs or other type of KPIs. You think about Lean or Kaizen. Maybe now it's more, but back in the day was less. But I understand that in your case, in Dixon's and Tesco, it was the first time that you were in contact with Lean and Kaizen, or in the manufacturing side where you were in past experiences, you were already working with that, or first time was Dixon? Yeah,
with the first times with Dixon's, I hadn't really come across it before in the brewery industry, electronics industry. Maybe it was there, I just never saw it, was never part of it. But yeah, it was definitely retail focus on it. So I've learnt it within retail rather than the manufacturing sector. At Dixon's, the focus was in the area I was working on was more around the logistics and supply chain piece, about how could we get an order to a customer as cheaply as possible. Either of that, if that's fulfilling via the store, so how can you get the cost per unit of fulfillment to that store as cheap as possible? Or if you're going with e-commerce, then obviously the various different layers of operation that's needed for that. Obviously the website cost, the call center cost, the warehousing cost, the courier cost, and then the cost of recovery if things go wrong, which obviously part of the Lean and Kaizen piece is trying to reduce those and minimize those as much as possible. So it was very, I guess probably, let's say with the manufacturing spin on it, but from a logistics and supply chain perspective. And then over time was kind of, as moving into Tesco and then into my consulting career, it was then that started applying that more and more to store processes, obviously with a particular focus then on the simpler for colleagues. And also with that introduction of omnichannel coming into the store. I think the thing for me that I've always found within store operations is that ultimately they're very much designed around consumers. They're designed around equipping the colleague with the right skills to be able to deal with a consumer in the best way possible, either to upsell them to other products or resolve their issues if they've got them, or just generally be a great colleague and being happy and
quality
upbeat
of
and
the consumer
quality
interaction,
of the service, all that type of good stuff. And ultimately, I guess as part of bringing in omnichannel into stores, one of the changes that I saw as part of that is that actually a lot of the store colleagues would struggle initially with that introduction of, actually now I need to go out and do basically what's fundamentally a warehousing process. I need to go out to a computer, I need to print an order out or bring it onto a tablet, go and locate some stock, package some stock into a box, label it up with a courier label, and then receive the courier collection, hand over and scan the parcels and let them go on. And what I kind of saw through going that was actually there was quite a bit of change management that was needed within stores when you were introducing omnichannel processes. To make them as efficient as possible, because it's a new additional process to a store. And secondly, then, is how to help people with the change management of dealing with the consumer on a day-to-day basis to now actually, now I need to do basically a warehouse
completely
process.
different skills, right?
Completely different skills. And actually, you would have thought that, it's one of those things I think I always find in with retailers and stores, people are running a store is easy. Yeah. Well, if it was easy, then no one would be going out of business.
Actually.
No one would be going out of business. It's actually quite tough. But particularly from a colleague perspective, that transition really quite challenging for a lot of people. So having to really then major on the change management piece and the understanding, giving the understanding to the colleague of what they were doing differently, but also I think in terms of designing the processes there and optimizing them to make them as simple as possible, because it is an alien thing to do to a lot of people in stores when they've been trained to deal with consumers and deliver that great consumer service, to then switch them into omnichannel processes, often quite hard to get people to execute them in the right way. So there's lots of different ways that we look to implement that depending on the retailer that was there, whether it was about having multi-skilled colleagues, really coming from my Tesco background, where that's exactly what we were looking at from a lean and a Kaizen perspective, is having the ability for colleagues to do different roles.
You have to have such a broad amount of skills, going not only from the customer service, but also on how you run your in-store processes to how you run, for example, omnichannel related processes, right? So you need a different set of skills for the same employee that is in the store.
Exactly.
Normally you could divide this in the past in different silos, let's call it, where each skill is attributed to that silo, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think coming from the Tesco background as well, often it was departments within the store. So if you worked on grocery and vegetables, fruit and vegetables, you only worked in that space. Kind of going back historically, and part of that transformation using Lean Six Sigma and Kaizen was to bring these multi-skilled colleagues in who they could work in fruit and veg one day, and then the next day they might be doing stock deliveries, stock takes. Then doing omnichannel orders and being able to flex people in different areas. So it was often then around creating, I guess, a greater career path for colleagues in store as well. So giving them more flexibility to say, actually, for us as an organisation, the more skills that you have as an individual, the more valuable you are to me. Because then from a labour and workforce planning perspective, if you're multi-skilled in lots of different areas, I can, wherever I've got a gap in terms, I can drop you in.
Like a polyvalent matrix.
Exactly.
You know exactly in which process this person fits.
Exactly.
Right?
So I think as part of that, going through those projects in that space, it was always thinking about the change management that was needed. What's the scale of change for this particular retailer, of implementing omnichannel? Is it massively different to what they're doing on a day-to-day basis? Is it closer? Are we dealing with multi-skills individuals? Are we dealing with siloed departmental individuals? And that then would for me work out the logic of how we would implement those processes within a retailer, and then always having one eye on the simplicity, the Kaizen, the lean way of doing it, to make sure that it was super simple, so that you can't but fall over yourself, but to get the process right. And that's where then again, leaning on technology, that becomes super helpful to be able to, give very few options and very little wiggle room for thinking. Because ultimately that's what technology should bring to any business, is it takes thought away, because the system's doing the thinking for you, so that you don't need to anymore. It presents the right answers to you on the screen. And I think that's where, when you blend colleagues in store with technology, and well-designed technology that's based on a lean or Kaizen process, that's where things become super simple. They're faster, they're quicker, they're better, they're easier. It's hard to get it wrong, which is ultimately what you want to do when you've got thousands of colleagues executing the same process day in, day out within stores. You want the variance of error and the waste to be as limited as possible. So that's where I guess the change management, the one-to-one interactions with colleagues, the simple processes, supported by technology, when those three come together, that's when you can get a really fantastic,
I guess is the ultimate goal, right? To have process as efficient as possible, that it's hard to get it wrong, but also where technology, and that I think we'll come back to this topic later. I think that how technology supports also that process, so that it's even helping the staff to be even more efficient, because it takes away specific tasks, repetitive tasks, automatizes, gives you the right answers when you're dealing with the consumer, and so on and so on. There's still one thing before I jump to the next topic, Robert, because I think it's interesting, because you have the manufacturing side and the retail side, even though you've been much more, I guess, involved in retail. But it's true that when we talk about manufacturing and we come to Kaizen and lean methodologies, normally the focus is always, cost, quality, and delivery times, and so on. So you're always going around, how can I make my operations a bit cheaper? How can I increase the quality of my product and avoid some specific quality rates, non-compliant quality rates that I have in my process? Or how can I reduce the lead time that I have in my process, or be always on time delivering to my customers? Even though in this case the customer is not the final customer, not always. You can also have a manufacturing facility that is kind of omni-channel and delivers directly to customers or to businesses. In retail, when we are talking about retail operations, you brought a very interesting topic that for you is obvious, but is the customer experience and the customer satisfaction. How do you think Lean and Kaizen focuses much more on that? Because there is this kind of feeling that retail is about getting the customer happy, and consumer satisfaction is a very important thing that sometimes manufacturing sites do not have, because do not have a final customer that comes into a store and buys something, and there is no physical interaction. And how do you see this change, right, between the manufacturing side and the retail side, and how important is still keeping in mind those quality, cost, and delivery focus, or more getting into focus about the consumer experience and satisfaction?
Yeah, I think, for me, I think it depends what type of retailer you are, and I think how you then approach it as a result of that. So, having worked with a number of luxury retailers over the years, where margin is strong, and therefore that focus on cost is it's still there, but it's not as prevalent, let's say, as you would have in a grocery or electronics retailer where the margins are really thin. And I think from that perspective, it's looking at it in a slightly different way. So it's for me, it might be more sort of service focused or colleague focused rather than cost, because cost isn't as big a driver as it is in other low margin retailers. So from that perspective, what was really interesting is how some of the luxury retailers have almost masked their inefficiencies, let's say, within processes. And for me, it was, again, not that I've been a luxury customer that often myself, but having observed it working with the retailers is that moment where, as a consumer, you walk into the store, you engage with a colleague, you tell them broadly what you're looking for from a product perspective, and then the first thing they do is they sit you down, similar to as we are here, come and sit you down in a seat and go and offer you a nice drink. It might be champagne or something, luxury from that perspective, so that you can relax and, let's say, get into the essence or the spirit of the retail location. but often it's about actually masking operational issues that you've got. So I need to sit you down and I need to give you a glass of champagne to get you settled, because it's going to take me now a few minutes to go away and actually find the products that you're interested in, because my back of house operations haven't been optimized to deliver product in a very quick and a seamless manner.
And just one, you think that comes from the high margins that are behind it? So this lack of optimization between in those back office or back of house processes?
Yeah, I think so. I won't name names. Let's say from a luxury retailer perspective, but there's one of them that has a retail store on Oxford Street in London, huge retail store with 26 stock rooms. So they basically, obviously built a retail unit into a building. And it obviously wasn't optimized for retail, because obviously you would never choose to have 26 stock rooms in the same building. So therefore, it's where store design has taken over and been more focused around the brand and the brand perception for a consumer, with actually little forethought in terms of operational efficiency. So yeah, that often that's moment of let me sit you down, let me give you a drink, is because I've got a very suboptimal back of house, which is we're focused on brand and looking great for the consumer, but not necessarily looking at the service times or the process then of actually locating stock and serving the consumer in the right way. So what's really interesting from that perspective is when you work with retailers like that actually they really struggle to understand the benefits that process optimization and Kaizen lean can deliver, until you then start showing actually ultimately a lot of the behaviors and the culture that's brought up in the business is designed around masking the consumer experience away from the inefficiencies in the back of house. And so there, I think being able to work with retailers to get them to understand the optimization in terms of store design as a starting point, so that then you can overlay on top of that great consumer experience. Quite interesting, and work with a retailer with that, where the project started out as bringing in omni-channel processes into stores, and when we showed back to the retailer, here's what the process will look like, and here's why they're quite long and lengthy and complex because of your suboptimal back of house. Managing then to get them to realise that, and to actually, it was really interesting. One of the retailers we worked with, where we did a study going across the 3 continents, so across sort of the Asia region, the Europe region, and the Americas region, where through starting to implement those processes in stores, they actually realised how important, how key it was to actually get the space and the layout optimised in order to get the processes, to deliver great consumer experience. And what they ended up doing is they recognised that, and they had a colleague in the Americas who they ended up promoting to be their director of stores, because he fully understood that, and he selected units, yes, based on their location, obviously from a premium and luxury retail perspective, but the most important thing to him was the back of house, was making sure that back of house was laid out perfectly. And again, for you or I, with our experience in Lean and Kaizen, it was a perfect retail experience from a back of house perspective. It was a back of house experience that you would love to take your consumers and show them. It was so clean, it was so tidy, it was so 5 S's everywhere, perfectly laid out, that you would have real pride in, and happily bring your customers into your back of house and show it to you. So it was great actually to see that retailer acknowledge and understand that lean thinking, and bringing that to the consumer of how that could not only optimize their business in terms of the omni-channel experience, but just their general business of walking consumers, and being able to actually get them the products that they were looking for quickly and efficiently, so that they didn't have to sit them down and they didn't have to wait 20 minutes to drink a glass of champagne. Or
the glass of champagne then becomes part of the experience and not of the inefficiency. So
Correctly.
Then it's part of the consumer satisfaction at the end of the day on how do I drive that specific step so that it brings a specific output that I want to have, or the customer to feel in that specific case, right?
Yeah, and then it becomes a choice for the consumer.
Exactly.
The customer wants to be in and out very quickly.
Yeah,
perfect.
Because if the customer says, no, I don't want a glass, then you have a problem.
Then
right?
you have a problem. Then you've got consumers waiting around.
Exactly, and the customer can see inefficiencies in the process.
Exactly.
So actually, would you say, Robert, that this is actually the difference between what we call the grocery and the premium retail. Maybe just for the audience, you can define what means premium retail and grocery retail, just to understand the term itself.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think from a let's say premium or luxury perspective, we're talking about let's say the largest brands in the world, the Louis Vuittons, the Burberrys, the Pradas, these guys, the guys that let's say are very, very high end luxury retail. Then coming obviously down through sort of premium, where you're kind of Tommy Hilfiger and Gant and these type of brands, and then through to grocery, obviously where, and again obviously what you're happening as you're coming through those levels is the margins are just getting tighter and tighter. So when you end up at Tesco on one side and you've got Louis Vuitton on the other, there's a massive difference in terms of those margins.
So at the end of the day is also going from a much more customized consumer experience to a kind of less customized consumer experience. For example, when we go to a Louis Vuitton store, we expect to have a one-to-one experience with a sales assistant, let's say, who will sit us down, maybe give us a glass of champagne, be all the time with us, assess us, give us some recommendations and so on. So it's this is what we talk about luxury premium, going down to grocery, where it's more like grocery stores, Tesco, or in Poland we have Biedronka, I would say, or other type of stores when you just go to the store, find yourself the product, go to the cashier, have a checkout, and then leave the store. So there is very little, I understand, also interaction with the sales assistant. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're still there, and I'll just say it's just a balance, isn't it? The balance
yes.
between operational process and customer service process are just different. So you'd still expect to interact with a colleague in a grocery. It's just that the percentage of the occurrences of that is much smaller.
It's much less.
And obviously the focus is in a different area. But ultimately, let's say when you're dealing with process optimization in stores, regardless of whether you're in a Tesco, you're in a Louis Vuitton, you're still looking at the same type of processes. There's still stock being taken in. There's still stock counts going on. There's still stock loss. There's still customer service process going on. It's just that the balance is slightly different depending on that. But actually, let's say the skills and the application from a Kaizen and a lean perspective, it's very, very similar. It's just that the frequency of those processes and in some cases the complexity of those processes are slightly different, but it's very similar from that perspective. It's just more understanding, I think, the culture of the organization and how it's focused, and being able to then deal with the change management that's needed, particularly if you're looking at a high-end luxury retailer where it's very much customer. That's where we saw the biggest differential then to be able to implementing, warehouse processes as part of the omni-channel experience. That's where we really struggled, because obviously the focus of training and effort of that retailer, very different than to a Tesco where it's a bit more balanced, let's say, certainly from that perspective.
So that's in the end, I understand that it depends a little bit. Talking about grocery or about premium luxury retail, it actually depends on the culture of the organization. Also, how do we look at this? I'm asking because it's interesting to see also within retail how much the lean and Kaizen approach can change from a grocery retail to a luxury or premium retail. Because normally in our heads would be much more that luxury and premium is more focused on bringing the consumer to a specific experience. So it's more about the customer journey that we have, while in the grocery side is more about process optimization, back office process optimization, like back of house, let's call it, while in luxury is more about front of house. But I understand that you are not really saying, you're saying that depends on the culture, and that also is a bit looking at the same level of processes. Just depends on the balance that we take on front of house or back of house. Maybe we don't need as much front of house in the grocery because of the situation or the culture that this company wants to have, while in luxury front of house will be important, but as also it can be back of house. Even sometimes it can be more than back of house in a grocery. I'm not sure, but it can happen. So it's actually something that stays there in balance to find what's the most effective, let's say, balance between those two areas, right?